بهالفيديو غريغ برادن من أهم العلماء والباحثين بعصرنا بيفسر علاقة أحاسيسنا بالحقل الكهرومغناطيسي.
Heart rate variability and the electromagnetic field. All of these are being created through the way we feel about our relationship to the world. When we are kept in fear, then it shuts down those responses that give us our power. And that's our divinity. And when we embrace our divinity, it doesn't change what happens in the world, Michael. It changes our response to it. When we are no longer in fear, we are no longer vulnerable and susceptible to the agendas and the vision that other people have for our own lives and the world around us. But that's not what's happening. And the technology now is what makes this possible. The technology is being used to engineer our perceptions, to engineer the way we think about ourselves through social media. And that is something that we all have to recognize and face right now. My personal feeling is we can only be responsible for ourselves. And it is impossible to convince or persuade anyone of anything that they do not want to look at. And many of our brothers and sisters on this planet are so frightened by the changes that create so much uncertainty in their lives that it's more comforting to stay in the fear of the unknown than it is to face the potential and the responsibility that comes with knowing who they really are. So you cannot convince or persuade anyone of that. Ultimately, I think we're all responsible for our own lives, our own perceptions, our own healing, and it means different things to different people. But the science tells us that it doesn't take 8 billion people that live on the planet to create the kind of a shift that you're talking about, because we are all linked in an underlying field that scientific community, it's no longer controversial. It used to be called New Age thinking, until 2012, when the scientists announced in 2012 that the existence of a field that underlies all the reality that we know. It's the container for everything that we know. And what that means, Michael, if we are all in the same container, what that says to us is that we don't have to work on changing the container out there. And the reason is because we are the container. And here's what I mean by that. There's a field, it's called the Higgs field, is the term that's being used right now, called The Matrix. The Divine Matrix is a book that I wrote. Lynn McTaggart calls it the field. It's there. But I've gone to conferences and here are the physicists on the stage, and here's what they're doing. They're saying there's a field, and then their hands do this. There's a field out there that connects all things. Here's what they're missing. The average human body has about 50 trillion cells, is what we're told. And every cell is about 100 trillion atoms. So if you want to know how many atoms you are, you can multiply 50 trillion times 100 trillion. Every one of those atoms is emerging from the field that they're talking about and collapsing back into that field in this dance of photons emerging and collapsing in the field. The field's not out there. Literally, we are the field. And what that means, this is so simple and it's so powerful. It means the change that we want to see in the world, we must become in our lives the change that we want to see in the world. But what the science now is also showing is a relatively few number of people can achieve an optimum state and influence that field for everyone in a positive way, because you don't have to export the change to another location. What we become is what that field reflects back into our lives. If we want to be loved, and if we want people to be compassionate to us in our lives, and if we want to be heard and understood, we must hear and understand those around us. We must accept and love ourselves, which is that's a lifetime of workshop right there, is loving ourselves, because we've been taught not to for so very, very long, for so many generations. As we become in our lives what we choose to see in the world, all of a sudden there's this real interesting thing that happens, is we feel less of a need to go out and change the world. We become a little bit more accepting. Doesn't mean that we tolerate the horrors of child trafficking or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is when we accept our role and our responsibility in the field that connects all things, then our focus shifts because we got our hands full with our own personal workshop. My hands are full with that right now. I'm a student. I know it, but I still have to learn it and I still have to live it. And believe me, I get plenty of opportunities in this line of business every day with interactions with producers and attorneys and publishers and people who are angry. I get a lot of opportunity to live in my life what it is that I want to see in the world.
Well, it's interesting because anger is disempowering. You're giving your power away. You must be a victim and somebody else must be an oppressor for you to be angry. And that does nothing to serve you.
I've looked a lot at when the riots were happening wholesale in America just a couple of years ago. And then I was in Europe. Every European city I would go into, there were protests, there were riots, they would shut down public transportation. And there was a lot of anger and a lot of hate. And what I see largely is there's a lot of fear in the world because the world has changed and people's lives are uncertain. We cannot plan. That field that we were talking about, it knows two states. It knows coherence or it knows chaos. And you can go out and angrily protest as much as you want for a good cause. You have to ask yourself, what am I feeding the field? And in the anger of that protest, are you feeding the field coherence or are you feeding the field chaos? And if it's chaos, then you're contributing to the very conditions you'd like to change. And this is an exercise that I do every day. What am I feeding the field today? What am I feeding the field in my response to my wife and the conversation that we're having, or to my producer? What am I feeding the field? And it helps to inform me that I have a choice and where I might want to go with that choice.
إذن يا أحبائي صرتوا تعرفوا هلأ ليش أنا بضلني عيد وكرر بفيديوهاتي أهمية تنظيف الذات والتركيز على رفع تردداتنا، لأنه أنا بأحاسيسي وأفكاري أصنع الواقع الذي أنا فيه، وهذا لا يحصل بكبسة زر فجأة، هو ورشة عمل بشتغل عليها كل يوم وبتاخد معي وقت كتير. مثل ما قال غريغ برادن، محبة ونور وسلام للجميع.